The Bible tells the story of enormous cities that were wiped off the map by a direct act of God. Today, we are going to visit the real ruins of 7 of those cities and discover what they look like today. And let me warn you now, the scientific discovery made at the exact location of one of them, which we will see at the end of this video, is simply terrifying. Before we continue, leave a like so this message can reach even more people. Now, let's get straight to it. 1. Jericho, the impossible fall. Jericho was not just an ordinary city. It was a formidable military fortress. Its double walls were so thick and so high that people built houses on top of them. For the Israelites, led by Joshua and lacking formal military training, it was a suicidal mission. They had no catapults, battering rams, or siege weapons. From a human perspective, the invasion was mathematically impossible. But the strategy God gave them was, to say the least, astonishing. God did not command them to attack the gates. He simply commanded them to march. For 6 long days, the Israelite army marched once around the city in complete, deafening silence. The only sounds were footsteps on the sand as the priests carried the sacred Ark of the Covenant. Imagine the psychological tension of that moment. On the first day, the soldiers of Jericho, standing safely atop their walls, must have laughed at that strange procession. But as the days passed, that daily silence slowly turned into fear. What were they waiting for? The suspense filled the air until the 7th day. Then the command changed. They marched around the city 7 times. On the final lap, the priests blew their ram's horn trumpets and all the people shouted together with one mighty battle cry. What happened next defies both physics and engineering. The earth shook, and the massive walls of Jericho collapsed instantly, falling down upon themselves. The once invincible city was left completely exposed. The Israelites advanced and, obeying God's command, burned everything. But the great question is, what remains of Jericho today? Was it all just a legend? This is where modern archaeology enters the story. Today, ancient Jericho is known as the archaeological site of Tel es-Sultan. When archaeologists began excavating the site, they were stunned. They discovered a layer of ash nearly 3 feet thick, proving that the city had been violently destroyed by fire. But the detail that shocked researchers the most was the city wall. Excavations revealed that the bricks of the outer wall had actually collapsed outward from the city, creating a perfect ramp of rubble. It was exactly the kind of ramp the Israelites would have needed to climb in order to enter the city. The silent stones of Tel es-Sultan still remain today, reminding us that no wall can stand when the command comes from above. Jericho fell because of obedience. But what happens when pride blinds the victors? Only a few miles from those ruins, our second city hides a story of betrayal and a brilliant military ambush. Let's discover what remains of the city of Ai. 2. Ai, the dark secret and the brilliant ambush. After the supernatural victory at Jericho, the Israelites believed they were absolutely unstoppable. The next target on the map seemed like nothing more than a minor obstacle, a small city called Ai. Compared to the massive walls that had just crumbled into dust, the city appeared so insignificant that Joshua's spies said, "We don't even need to send the whole army. Just a few thousand men will take care of it." It was supposed to be a quick and effortless victory. But what happened next shattered the nation. The soldiers marched forward confidently. Yet when they reached the gates of Ai, the unimaginable happened. The warriors of that tiny city not only resisted, they completely defeated the forces of Israel. Chasing the soldiers down the hillside, their unshakable confidence turned into complete panic. How could the God who had brought down mighty Jericho allow his people to be humiliated and defeated by such a small city? Desperation spread throughout the camp. The problem, as they soon discovered, was not the enemy's superior strength. It was a hidden sin among their own people. One man in Israel had secretly taken treasures from the ruins of Jericho, directly violating God's command. The lesson was painful. Hidden corruption behind the scenes led to a public defeat. After the sin had been dealt with, God did not repeat the miracle of Jericho. This time there would be no silence, no trumpets, and no walls collapsing on their own. It was time to fight. God gave Joshua a military strategy that was both simple and brilliant. The plan required patience and discipline. Joshua sent a small group of soldiers forward as bait to attack the city from the front. The king of Ai, still intoxicated by the pride of his victory the day before, took the bait immediately. He ordered all of his men to leave the city and chase after the Israelites, who pretended to flee in terror. The city was left with its gates wide open and completely unprotected. That was the moment when the real trap was sprung. Thousands of elite warriors, whom Joshua had carefully hidden behind the city the night before, emerged from their hiding places. They rushed into the empty streets and set the entire city on fire. When the king of Ai looked back and saw the smoke of his city darkening the sky, he knew he had lost everything. But what remains of this place today? For many years, the city was used by critics of the Bible as evidence that the scriptures were inaccurate. Archaeologists spent decades excavating a well-known site called Et-Tel, but the dates did not match the time of Joshua. The city seemed like a ghost lost in history. However, in recent years, researchers shifted their attention to a nearby archaeological site called Khirbet el-Makatir. The discoveries changed everything. They uncovered the foundations of a large fortified gate facing exactly the direction described in the biblical account. To the west of the city, they identified a deep valley, the perfect geographical setting to hide an entire army. Most significantly, they uncovered burned stones and a thick layer of ash, confirming that the city had suffered a devastating fire at precisely the same period described in the Bible. The archaeological puzzle was finally complete. The city of Ai fell through a brilliant military ambush. But our third destination takes us to the sea. We are about to visit one of the wealthiest metropolises of the ancient world, a city so rich and arrogant that it believed it could never be conquered. 3. Tyre, the billionaire city that was thrown into the sea. Imagine a metropolis that controlled the global economy of its time, an island fortress surrounded by deep waters, unreachable and unimaginably wealthy. That was Tyre, the jewel of the Mediterranean Sea. Its merchant fleet dominated the seas, and the pride of its rulers knew no limits. When the holy city of Jerusalem was destroyed, the merchants of Tyre celebrated, thinking only of the profits they would gain from the downfall of their neighbors. It was at that moment of pure arrogance that the prophet Ezekiel delivered one of the most extraordinary, specific, and unlikely prophecies in the entire Bible. Ezekiel did not simply say that Tyre would be defeated. He declared that the city's walls would be torn down, but he went even further. He said that the stones, the timber, and even the dust from the city's ruins would be scraped away and thrown into the middle of the sea. The site would be scraped bare until it became nothing more than a smooth rock where fishermen would spread out their nets to dry. It sounded completely impossible. For centuries, mighty empires attempted to conquer the island and failed miserably. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon launched a military siege against Tyre that lasted 13 long years. He succeeded in destroying the mainland portion of the city, but it accomplished nothing. The inhabitants simply gathered their wealth, sailed to the safety of the island fortress, and continued mocking their enemies from behind its walls. It seemed as though the prophecy had failed. After all, why would an invading army go through the absurd effort of throwing an entire ruined city into the sea? Then, 250 years later, the answer arrived from Greece. Alexander the Great marched with his undefeated army and demanded the immediate surrender of the island. The leaders of Tyre, confident behind their massive walls and protected by the sea, refused. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Since Alexander did not have a navy powerful enough to attack the island, he made an astonishing decision. If he could not sail to the city, he would build a road across the sea to reach it. But constructing a causeway nearly a mile long required an enormous amount of material. Where did it come from? From the ruins of the old mainland city of Tyre. Alexander's soldiers scraped the ground bare. They took every stone, every wooden beam, and finally even the dust and soil, throwing it all into the sea to create a solid causeway. Without ever reading the Old Testament, Alexander the Great fulfilled the prophecy with astonishing precision, almost word for word. He marched across the city's own ruins, crossed the sea, conquered the island, and destroyed the empire. And what does that place look like today? If you search for Tyre in modern-day Lebanon, you may be surprised. You will not find an island. The stone causeway built by Alexander permanently changed the sea currents around the area. Over the centuries, sand from the sea gradually accumulated over those submerged ruins, permanently connecting the island to the mainland and creating a peninsula. If you walk along the shores of that peninsula today, you will see Greek and Roman columns lying beneath the shallow waters. Even more remarkable, on the sunlit rocks, you can still see local fishermen doing exactly what Ezekiel wrote about thousands of years ago. They used the bare stones of the ancient city to spread out and dry their fishing nets. Tyre fell because of greed and a false sense of security. But our next destination takes us to a capital so wicked and so cruel that the entire world breathed a sigh of relief when it finally sank into the dust. 4. Nineveh, the empire of terror that turned to dust. If you had asked anyone in the ancient world which place on earth was the most terrifying, the answer would have been unanimous: Nineveh. The capital of the vast Assyrian Empire was not just a gigantic city. It was a machine of war and cruelty. The Assyrians took pride in their brutality. They created monuments showing how they skinned their enemies alive and impaled prisoners to spread psychological terror throughout neighboring nations. No one in their right mind wanted to go anywhere near that place. That is why the most famous story about Nineveh begins with a desperate escape. When God commanded the prophet Jonah to go there and warn the city that it would be destroyed, he boarded a ship and fled in the opposite direction. Jonah did not want them to be forgiven. In his mind, those monsters deserved the harshest punishment imaginable. But we all know how that story turned out. After being swallowed by a great fish, Jonah finally went to Nineveh, delivered God's message, and against all expectations, the king and all the people repented. God spared the city and canceled its destruction. It sounds like the perfect happy ending, doesn't it? The problem is that the biblical story does not end there. Decades passed. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those who had repented with Jonah forgot the lesson. Nineveh returned to its old ways of violence and oppression, becoming even more wicked than before. Only this time, there would be no prophet bringing a second chance. Instead, God sent the prophet Nahum with a final judgment. Nahum described in remarkable detail how the city would be destroyed. He prophesied that the river gates would be opened, the palace would collapse, and Nineveh would be wiped off the map so completely that future generations would not even know where it had once stood. And that is exactly what happened. In 612 BC, an alliance of enemy armies surrounded Nineveh. Historical records show that during the siege, torrential rains caused the Tigris River to flood, destroying part of the city's walls and fulfilling Nahum's prophecy exactly as it had been spoken. The invading armies entered through the breach opened by the floodwaters. They looted everything and burned the capital until nothing remained but ashes. But what does that terrible place look like today? The destruction was so complete that for more than 2,000 years, Nineveh simply disappeared. Many critics even claimed that the city was nothing more than a biblical myth because not a single brick could be found to prove it had ever existed. That changed in the 19th century. Archaeologists began excavating large mounds near the modern city of Mosul in Iraq. Beneath tons of sand and centuries of oblivion, they finally uncovered the ruins of the ancient capital, including its enormous royal library. The city that had once been the largest and most feared on earth is now little more than excavation trenches, broken walls, and dust. The prophet's words came true. Nineveh became a ghost swallowed by the desert. Interestingly, one of the peoples who helped reduce Nineveh to dust would soon become the next great villain of the Bible, a city famous for its tower, its immense wealth, and its proud king. 5. Babylon, the modern dictator who challenged prophecy. Nineveh was wiped off the map, but the power vacuum it left behind was quickly filled by an even greater empire. Now we arrive at the true giant of the Old Testament. If the ancient world had a global capital, the center of all wealth and power, it would undoubtedly have been Babylon. Imagine a city that radiated luxury and arrogance from every single brick. Under the rule of King Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon was an engineering marvel. Its double walls were so wide that chariots could race along the top of them. Its palaces glittered with gold, and its gates, especially the famous Ishtar Gate, were covered with brilliant blue glazed tiles. It was this relentless empire. It was this empire that destroyed Jerusalem, burned Solomon's temple, and carried God's people into exile. To the Babylonians, the God of Israel was simply another defeated god belonging to a conquered nation. But the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah strongly disagreed. They recorded a prophecy that, at the height of Babylon's power, sounded completely impossible. They declared that the greatest city in the world would not only fall, but would become a permanent desolate wasteland, a place of ruins where only owls and wild animals would make their homes, and where no traveler would ever pitch a tent. The beginning of the end came on one of the strangest nights in ancient history. While the new king of Babylon was hosting a blasphemous feast, drinking wine from the sacred vessels taken from the temple in Jerusalem, mysterious fingers appeared and wrote a sentence of judgment on the palace wall. That very night, the Persian army was waiting outside the city. Using a brilliant strategy, they diverted the Euphrates River, which flowed through Babylon, and silently marched into the city along the dry riverbed, passing beneath the massive bronze gates. The seemingly invincible city of Babylon fell in a single night. But the most fascinating part of this story is discovering what remains of Babylon today. The ruins of Babylon are located in present-day Iraq, just a few miles from Baghdad. For many centuries, the city remained exactly as the Bible had foretold, silent mounds of earth in the middle of nowhere. However, during the late 20th century, a modern dictator attempted to challenge that ancient biblical prophecy. Saddam Hussein spent an enormous fortune trying to rebuild Babylon. He wanted to transform it once again into a great inhabited city. He even ordered his own name to be engraved on newly made bricks, hoping to revive the glory of Nebuchadnezzar. But can you guess what happened? Wars broke out across the region. Saddam's regime collapsed, and he lost his life. The massive reconstruction project was completely abandoned. Humanity's attempt to prove the Bible wrong failed spectacularly. Today, if you visit Babylon, you will find only a few reconstructed tourist walls and the abandoned modern palace built by Saddam Hussein, now looted and falling into ruin. No one lives there. It is nothing more than a lonely archaeological site beneath the blazing Iraqi sun. Thousands of years have passed, yet the prophet's words still stand. Babylon has never again become a permanently inhabited city. So far, we have seen the destruction of cities brought down by armies and military strategies. But nothing compares to our final destination. What we are about to see involved no soldiers and no swords. Instead, it was an event so catastrophic that it still terrifies people today. 6 and 7, Sodom and Gomorrah, the terrifying scientific discovery. What we are about to explore challenges everything we think we know. So far, we have visited cities destroyed by war, military sieges, and invasions. But what happened in the Jordan Valley involved no human army. Sodom and Gomorrah were not merely defeated, they were completely obliterated. The Bible tells us that these cities descended into such extreme corruption, violence, and wickedness that the outcry against them reached heaven itself. When God sent 2 angels to rescue the only righteous family living there, the family of Lot, the people of the city responded by trying to assault the heavenly messengers. The final judgment had been declared. Lot received a terrifying command: flee to the mountains and do not look back. The next morning, the sun rose over the land. But instead of bringing light, it brought total destruction. The book of Genesis says that the Lord rained down fire and sulfur from heaven. Everything was consumed: the cities, their inhabitants, and even the vegetation throughout the valley. For centuries, critics claimed that Sodom and Gomorrah were nothing more than legends. Today, the region around the Dead Sea, where these cities are believed to have stood, is one of the most barren, salty, and lifeless places on Earth. It seemed impossible to prove that a thriving civilization had once existed there, a land the Bible describes as being like the garden of the Lord. But modern science decided to investigate that dead land. What researchers discovered at the archaeological site of el-Hammam in present-day Jordan shocked the academic world. Archaeologists uncovered the remains of a massive Bronze Age city that suddenly disappeared from history. But it was not abandoned, and it was not destroyed by war. The destruction layer uncovered at the site revealed an apocalyptic event. Researchers found pieces of pottery that had literally boiled, melted, and turned into glass. They also discovered melted bricks and rare minerals that can only form under extreme temperatures and pressures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. To put that into perspective, those are temperatures comparable to those produced by an atomic explosion. No weapon from the ancient world and no volcano in the region could have caused such destruction. The remarkable conclusion, published by numerous scientists in respected scientific journals, is that the city was destroyed by a cosmic airburst. A meteor exploded high in the atmosphere directly above the city, creating an enormous fireball and a supersonic shockwave that incinerated the entire valley within seconds, turning sand into glass. To many people, this scientific evidence closely resembles the biblical account of fire and sulfur raining down from heaven. Today, the ruins of these cities are little more than mounds of dry earth and ash near the shores of the Dead Sea. They stand as a powerful reminder of one of history's most mysterious disasters. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 7 cities surprised you the most? Leave your answer in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue uncovering the mysteries of biblical history. and click on the video now appearing on your screen to join us for our next incredible discovery.